Hello people of YouTube. Welcome back or to my channel. This fanfic. DC, Architect of Vengeance was written by Lord_Mef1 Stowe on web novel. Please note that the fanfic has an anti-hero MC, overpowered MC, revenge, prototype crossover, dark, vigilante justice, corrupt system, no romance/harem, slow progression, low screen time for MC initially, and slow progress. Also please note again that it also contains graphic violence and mature themes. MC is not a traditional hero. But with all that said, let's start the story. So,
Shut up, clock in and load up.
Chapter 1, Sarah's Suffering. The rain fell on Gotham's Lower East Side like tears from a broken sky, each drop carrying the weight of the city's sins down into the gutters where they belonged. Sarah Martinez pressed her face against the cold window of Mickey's diner, watching the water streak down the glass like the mascara that had run down her cheeks 3 hours ago. Her hands trembled as she counted the crumpled bills for the 7th time. $43.16. Not enough. Never enough. You gonna order something, lady, or just fog up my window all night? Mickey's voice cut through her thoughts like a rusty blade. She looked up at the grizzled owner, his face a roadmap of scars and disappointment. Even he looked at her with pity now, and that made everything worse. Coffee, she whispered. Just coffee. The hot liquid burned her tongue, but she welcomed the pain. It was better than the cold numbness that had settled into her bones over the past 6 months. 6 months since the accident. 6 months since the insurance company found their creative ways to deny her claim. 6 months since Vincent Torino had appeared at her door with his shark smile and his generous offer. Mrs. Martinez, I heard about your husband. Terrible thing, accidents like that. But you got bills, right? Medical bills. And little Sophia needs her medicine. Sophia. Her 8-year-old daughter was at home right now, probably doing homework at their kitchen table under the flickering light that Sarah couldn't afford to fix. The seizure medication cost $400 a month, and without David's income. Sarah's phone buzzed against the diner's scarred formica table. The screen showed Vincent's number, and her stomach clenched like a fist. Hello. Sarah, sweetheart. Vincent's voice was silk wrapped around a razor blade. You missed our appointment today. I was at the hospital with Sophia. She had an episode, and... That's touching, really. Family first, I always say. But business is business, and your payment was due yesterday. Sarah closed her eyes. I need more time. Just another week, I swear I'll have time. Vincent's laugh was like breaking glass. Honey, time is the one thing you can't afford. You owe me $12,000. Plus interest. Plus late fees. We're looking at 15 grand now. 15. The number hit her like a physical blow. But you said. I said a lot of things. What I'm saying now is simple. You pay by tomorrow night, or we start taking collateral. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone until the screen went black, her reflection staring back at her like a ghost. She thought about David, about the night shift at the chemical plant that was supposed to be routine. About the equipment malfunction that had filled his lungs with poison. About the insurance investigator who'd found David's signature on a waiver he'd never signed. About the way the plant manager had smiled when he told her there was nothing they could do. She thought about Sophia, about the seizures that came without warning, about the way her daughter's body would go rigid and her eyes would roll back until only the whites showed. About the bottles of pills that kept her alive, and the bills that kept piling up. About Vincent Torino's hands on her shoulders 3 days ago, his breath hot against her ear as he whispered what would happen if she couldn't pay. The coffee had gone cold. Sarah left a dollar tip. Mickey needed it more than she did and stepped back into the rain. The walk home took her through 5 blocks of urban decay, past sport-up storefronts and apartments where the American dream went to die. She passed the burned-out shell of Chan's Market, where the Wong family had lived above their store until their protection payments fell behind. Vincent's boys had made an example of them. Gasoline was cheap, and screams carried far in the thin-walled tenements. Sarah's building squatted on the corner like a concrete tumor, its windows dark except for the occasional flicker of candlelight or the blue glow of a television someone hadn't pawned yet. She climbed 3 flights of stairs that smelled like piss and desperation, her keys jingling like wind chimes in the darkness. Sophia was asleep at the kitchen table, her small face pressed against an open textbook. Math homework fractions. Sarah remembered helping her with the same problems last week, back when she still believed things might work out. She carried her daughter to bed, tucking the thin blanket around her narrow shoulders. Sophia stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Mama. SHH, baby. Go back to sleep. Are we going to be okay? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah smoothed her daughter's dark hair, the same color David's had been. Yes, sweetheart. Mama's going to fix everything. Sophia smiled and drifted back to sleep, trusting in the lie with the faith only children possessed. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the homework still scattered across its surface. Fractions. Parts of a whole. She thought about the fraction of a life they were living now, the fraction of justice they'd received, the fraction of hope she had left. Outside, Gotham's night symphony played its familiar tune, sirens in the distance, the rumble of elevated trains, the occasional gunshot that might have been a backfire. The city didn't sleep, it just closed its eyes and pretended not to see. She opened her laptop, the ancient machine wheezing to life like a dying animal. The internet connection was spotty, but she managed to navigate to her email. Bills, mostly. Overdue notices. A message from Sophia's school about the upcoming field trip she couldn't afford. And something else. The subject line was blank, the sender listed only as final court. Sarah frowned, her finger hovering over the delete button. Probably spam, or worse, another predator sensing her desperation like blood in the water. But something made her click it open. The message contained only an address, 1247 Bleecker Street, apartment 3B. Below that, a single line of text. When justice fails, judgment comes. Sarah stared at the screen until her eyes watered. She'd never heard of Bleecker Street, but the words echoed in her mind like a prayer. When justice fails. She thought about David's insurance claim, denied on a technicality. About the plant manager's smirk. About Vincent Toronto's hands and his promises of what tomorrow would bring. About fractions, and the pieces of her life that were disappearing one by one. Sarah closed the laptop and walked to the window. Somewhere out there, in the maze of Gotham streets, Vincent Toronto was probably counting money or breaking bones or planning which collateral he'd take first. Somewhere out there, the scales of justice sat rusted and broken, tipped so far toward the powerful that the weak couldn't even see them anymore. But somewhere out there, someone else was watching. Someone who understood that when the system failed, something else had to take its place. Sarah touched the glass, her fingertips leaving prints that would fade by morning. Tomorrow, Vincent would come for his payment. Tomorrow, she would have to choose between her daughter's medicine and her daughter's safety. Unless judgment came first. The rain continued to fall, washing the city's sins toward the river where they would join all the others. In the distance, a church bell tolled midnight, marking the end of one day of suffering and the beginning of another. But in the darkness between the raindrops, something else was stirring. Something that had been watching and waiting and remembering every unpunished crime, every unanswered cry for help, every broken scale on Lady Justice's blind eyes. Something that understood the difference between justice and vengeance. And didn't care. Chapter 2, Toronto's Collection. Vincent Toronto adjusted his gold watch and smiled at the sound of breaking bones. The basement of Toronto's authentic Italian restaurant smelled like garlic, wine, and fresh blood, a combination that always made Vincent nostalgic for the old country, even though he'd been born in Newark. The restaurant upstairs served decent food to honest people who kept their mouths shut and paid their tabs. Down here, in the soundproof cellar his grandfather had built during Prohibition, Vincent served a different kind of meal. Please, Marcus Chen whimpered through his shattered teeth. I just need another week. The insurance money, it's coming, I swear. Insurance money. Vincent rolled the words around his mouth like a fine wine. You know what I love about insurance, Marcus? It's all about risk assessment. And right now, you're looking like a very high-risk investment. Marcus was strapped to a dentist's chair Vincent had borrowed from a client who defaulted 3 months ago. Dr. Petrov had been quite the artist with his instruments before Vincent had fed him to the harbor. The chair was vintage, solid construction, and had excellent restraint capabilities. Vincent appreciated quality craftsmanship. He selected a pair of needle nose pliers from the surgical tray beside the chair. The metal gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, spotless and eager. Now, let's talk mathematics, Vincent said, positioning the pliers around Marcus's left pinky finger. You borrowed $8,000. With interest and penalties, you now owe me $14,437. That's a lot of money for a man whose restaurant just burned down. It wasn't my fault. Marcus sobbed. You said if I paid the protection money, Vincent squeezed. The finger broke with a sound like a branch snapping in winter. Marcus's scream echoed off the stone walls, joining the symphony of suffering that had played in this basement for 3 generations. I said a lot of things, Vincent replied, moving to the ring finger. What I'm saying now is that you have 48 hours to come up with my money, or I start collecting in other ways. He gestured to the video camera mounted in the corner, its red light blinking like a mechanical eye. Vincent had learned the power of documentation from his father, who'd learned it from his father. Fear was good, but recorded fear was a commodity that could be traded, sold, or leveraged for decades. My daughter, Marcus whispered. She's only 16. Please, don't. Don't what? Vincent's voice carried the mock innocence of a child pulling wings off flies. Don't document her contribution to your debt. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus. You're thinking like a victim instead of an entrepreneur. Your daughter is an asset. A very valuable asset, once we get her trained properly. He leaned closer, his breath warm against Marcus's ear. I have clients who pay premium rates for young talent. Especially the exotic types. Your little Amy, she's got that whole innocent schoolgirl thing going, doesn't she? Very marketable. Vincent straightened up and selected a different tool from the tray, a small, curved blade that Dr. Petrov had used for more delicate work. He tested its edge against his thumb, drawing a thin line of blood. Here's how this works, he continued, dabbing the blood on Marcus's forehead like a blessing. You have 2 days to bring me my money. If you can't, then Amy starts working for me. Don't worry, I'll take good care of her. Feed her regularly, make sure she gets her vitamins. Can't have the merchandise getting too thin. Marcus thrashed against the restraints, his face purple with rage and terror. You sick bastard. I'll kill you. I'll fucking kill you. Vincent laughed, a sound like champagne glasses breaking. With what? Your restaurant's ashes? Your empty bank account? Your broken fingers? He grabbed Marcus's chin, forcing him to look into his eyes. You're nothing, Marcus. Less than nothing. You're a cautionary tale I'm going to tell to other clients when they get ideas about standing up to me. He stepped back and nodded to Tony Ricci, his favorite enforcer. Tony was built like a refrigerator with anger management issues, and he approached Marcus with the enthusiasm of a kid opening Christmas presents. Tony's going to escort you home, Vincent said, cleaning the blood from his blade with a monogrammed handkerchief. Make sure you understand the terms of our agreement. And Marcus, if you're thinking about running, don't. I have friends in a lot of places. Some of them wear badges. As Tony began untying Marcus from the chair, Vincent's phone buzzed. A text message from Detective Ray Morrison, Judge Morrison's nephew and Vincent's favorite pet on the GCPD payroll. Chen complaint filed. Will be lost in paperwork. Usual rate? Vincent typed back, double rate. He's being difficult. The beauty of Gotham was its ecosystem. Everyone fed off everyone else, from the bottom feeders in the projects to the apex predators in City Hall. Vincent had spent 15 years cultivating his web, placing the right people in the right positions, learning which palms needed greasing and which throats needed cutting. Judge Morrison dismissed cases. Detective Morrison lost evidence. Commissioner Thorne looked the other way. District Attorney Price found procedural errors. It was a symphony of corruption, and Vincent was its conductor. His phone rang. Unknown number, but Vincent recognized the pattern: 3 rings, hang up, call back. One of his street assets. Yeah. Mr. Torino. It's Danny. I got something you need to hear. Danny Kowalski was a junkie who sold information for fixed money. Unreliable as a human being, but he had good ears and better survival instincts. Make it quick. That Martinez woman. The one with the sick kid. She's been asking around. About lawyers. Pro bono types. Vincent's grip tightened on the phone. Sarah Martinez owed him $15,000, and she was due to pay tomorrow. The math was simple: she couldn't pay, so she'd become part of his collection. He'd already lined up 3 clients who were interested in her services. The grieving widow angle was very popular with a certain demographic. What kind of lawyers? The bleeding heart kind. Civil rights, wrongful death, that bullshit. Word is she's trying to reopen her husband's case. Vincent felt a familiar heat building in his chest. David Martinez had been a problem, asking too many questions about safety violations at the chemical plant, threatening to go to the EPA. Vincent's associates at Apex Chemical had paid good money to make that problem disappear, and they wouldn't appreciate having it resurface. Where is she now? Home. But boss, there's something else. She's been getting weird mail. Some kind of legal thing, but not from any lawyer I know. Real mysterious stuff. Vincent ended the call and stared at the wall, where his grandfather's portrait watched him with dead eyes. Salvatore Torino had built this empire with blood and bullets, carving out a piece of Gotham through sheer brutality. He'd understood that fear was the only currency that never inflated, the only investment that always paid dividends. But Salvatore had also understood that problems left unattended became cancers. And cancers had to be cut out before they spread. Vincent walked to his office safe and removed a leather-bound ledger, his grandfather's book, passed down through 3 generations of Torinos. Every debt, every favor, every life taken or spared was recorded in meticulous detail. Vincent flipped to the current entries, running his finger down the names until he found Sarah Martinez. Next to her name, he wrote, "Accelerated collection. Personal attention required." He closed the book and placed it back in the safe, then selected a clean knife from his collection. Each blade had a story. This one had opened Detective Morrison's first bribe envelope, that one had carved up the last social worker who'd gotten too curious about missing kids. Tonight, a new blade would write a new story. Vincent checked his watch. 2:47 a.m. Sarah Martinez would be asleep, probably dreaming about her dead husband and her dying daughter. In a few hours, she'd wake up to a nightmare that would make her current problems seem like pleasant memories. He called Tony, who answered on the first ring. "Boss. Change of plans. The Martinez woman needs a personal visit. Tonight. You want me to bring the camera?" Vincent smiled, the expression transforming his face into something that belonged in a medieval painting of hell. "Bring everything. This is going to be a feature presentation." As he climbed the stairs from the basement, Vincent hummed an old Italian song his grandfather used to sing while working. It was about a shepherd who protected his flock from wolves, no matter the cost. The song had a beautiful melody, but Vincent had always preferred the verses about what happened to the wolves. Behind him, the basement fell silent except for the steady drip of water and the occasional creak of old bones. The walls had absorbed decades of screams, confessions, and final prayers. They were good walls, thick, soundproof, and discreet. Soon, they would have new stories to absorb. Vincent adjusted his tie and stepped into the witnesses afraid to testify. The city sprawled around him, full of people who owed him money, favors or fear. All of them would pay their debts, one way or another. It was just good business. Chapter 3, The Smiling Judge. Judge Harold Morrison had always believed that justice was like fine wine, it improved with age, and it was always better when you could afford the good stuff. He sat behind his mahogany desk in chambers, reading through the morning's docket while sipping coffee from a mug that read "World's Greatest Uncle." The irony wasn't lost on him. His nephew Ray had given him the mug last Christmas, shortly after Harold had made his third DUI disappear from the books. Family was important, after all. Blood was thicker than evidence. A soft knock interrupted his morning ritual. Margaret Henley, his clerk, peered through the doorway with the nervous expression she'd worn for the past 3 years. "Your Honor? The Martinez case is on today's calendar. Wrongful death civil suit." Harold set down his coffee and opened the thick file. Sarah Martinez versus Apex Chemical Industries. The woman was trying to sue over her husband's death, claiming negligence and cover-up. Harold had read through the paperwork twice, once to understand the case, and once to figure out how to kill it. Ah yes, the grieving widow. Harold's smile was the same one he used when sentencing teenagers to juvie for possession while their dealers walked free. "What's the status on the Apex documentation?" "Sealed by court order, Your Honor." "As you requested." "Excellent. And the EPA inspection reports?" "Ruled inadmissible due to procedural violations." Harold nodded approvingly. Margaret had learned well over the years. When he'd first inherited her from Judge Patterson, she'd been idealistic and thorough. Now she understood that thoroughness was a luxury that few could afford. "The toxicology report?" "Lost in evidence storage, Your Honor." Detective Morrison filed the report, but there seems to have been a clerical error. "How unfortunate." Harold's fingers drummed against the desk in a rhythm that matched the tick of his grandfather's clock. "And Mrs. Martinez's attorney?" "Public defender. Maria Vatz from the Legal Aid Society." Harold almost laughed. Maria Vatz was fresh out of law school, probably still believed in truth and justice and all those other fairy tales they taught in constitutional law. She'd walk into his courtroom with a briefcase full of righteous indignation and walk out with a lesson in how the real world worked. "Schedule the hearing for 1030. And Margaret? Make sure we have good court security today. Grieving widows can be emotional." As Margaret retreated, Harold opened his personal phone and scrolled through his messages. 3 new transfers from his Cayman account, courtesy of Apex Chemical's legal department. A reminder about his nephew's promotion ceremony. And a text from Vincent Torno, "Judge, need Martinez case buried deep. Worth $50K to right decision." Harold deleted the message and smiled. Vincent was crude but efficient, and his money was as green as anyone else's. The beauty of Gotham's legal system was its flexibility. Justice might be blind, but she wasn't deaf to the sound of cash registers. The morning crawled by with the usual parade of misery and corruption. Harold sentenced a homeless veteran to 6 months for sleeping in a doorway while dismissing assault charges against a city councilman's son. He approved a search warrant that violated the Fourth Amendment 7 different ways, denying a motion to suppress evidence that had been obtained through obvious police brutality. It was a good day at the office. At 1025, Harold took his place on the bench, his black robes flowing around him like the wings of a carrion bird. The courtroom was nearly empty. A few law students, some court reporters, and the parties involved. Sarah Martinez sat at the plaintiff's table next to her young attorney, her hands folded in her lap like a woman praying for miracles. Harold had stopped believing in miracles around the time he'd started accepting bribes. "All rise for the Honorable Harold Morrison, presiding." The bailiff's voice echoed through the courtroom as Harold settled into his chair. He enjoyed this moment, the ritual of power, the way everyone stood and waited for his permission to sit. It reminded him why he'd wanted to be a judge in the first place, back when he'd still believed his own campaign speeches about serving justice. Be seated. We are here today for the matter of Martinez versus Apex Chemical Industries. Is the plaintiff ready to proceed? Maria Vat stood up, her hands trembling slightly as she shuffled through her notes. Yes, Your Honor. We are prepared to present evidence that Apex Chemical Industries, objection. The voice belonged to Richard Blackstone, Apex's lead attorney. Blackstone was everything Maria Vat's wasn't: expensive, experienced, and utterly without conscience. Harold had worked with him on dozens of cases over the years, and the man was worth every penny of his $1,000 hourly rate. Mr. Blackstone, the plaintiff hasn't even finished her opening statement. Your Honor, we move for immediate dismissal. The plaintiff's case relies entirely on evidence that has been ruled inadmissible, testimony from witnesses who refuse to appear, and documentation that violates our client's proprietary rights. Harold pretended to consider this, stroking his chin thoughtfully. In the gallery, Sarah Martinez leaned forward, her dark eyes fixed on him with desperate hope. Her daughter wasn't in court, probably at school, or maybe at home having another seizure while her mother fought for justice that would never come. Ms. Vatz, how do you respond? The young lawyer stood again, her voice stronger now. Your Honor, our case is built on solid evidence of negligence and deliberate cover-up. David Martinez died because Apex Chemical failed to maintain proper safety protocols. The toxicology report clearly shows. What toxicology report? Harold's voice cut through her words like a blade through silk. I don't see any toxicology report in the evidence file. It was submitted 3 weeks ago, Your Honor. Detective Morrison took the blood samples personally. Harold made a show of shuffling through papers, even though he knew exactly where the report was: at the bottom of Gotham Harbor, courtesy of his nephews. Attention to detail. I'm afraid there's no such report in the court record, Ms. Vatz. Perhaps you could refresh my memory about this alleged evidence. Maria Vatz's face went pale. She fumbled through her briefcase, pulling out folders and loose papers with increasing desperation. I have copies, Your Honor. Right here. Copies of what, Ms. Vatz? Without chain of custody documentation, without the original samples, what exactly are you presenting to this court? Harold watched the young lawyer's world crumble in real time. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, her carefully prepared case dissolving into legal quicksand. Behind her, Sarah Martinez gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white with tension. Your Honor, Maria Vatz said, her voice barely above a whisper, surely we can request new samples, from a body that's been cremated. Blackstone's voice dripped with mock sympathy. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of desperate fishing expedition that wastes the court's time and taxpayer money. Harold nodded gravely. I'm inclined to agree, Mr. Blackstone. Ms. Vatz, do you have any admissible evidence to present? The silence stretched like a torture rack. Maria looked at her notes, at her client, at the empty gallery where justice was supposed to sit. Finally, she shook her head. No, Your Honor. Then I have no choice but to grant the defendant's motion for dismissal. Harold's gavel came down like a gunshot. Case dismissed with prejudice. The plaintiff is ordered to pay court costs. The sound that came from Sarah Martinez wasn't quite a scream, more like the noise a wounded animal makes when it realizes the trap won't open. She stood up slowly, her face a mask of disbelief and devastation. Your Honor, she said, her voice cracking, my husband is dead. My daughter is dying. They killed him, and you're letting them walk away. Harold's expression didn't change. Mrs. Martinez, I understand you're grieving. But this court deals in evidence, not emotions. If you have new, admissible evidence, you're welcome to file a new suit. With what money? Sarah's voice rose to a shriek. I can't even afford my daughter's medicine. They destroyed everything, and you're helping them. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand moving to his taser. Harold held up a hand to stop him. The woman was no threat, just another broken piece of Gotham's machinery. Mrs. Martinez, I suggest you compose yourself. Outbursts like this won't bring your husband back or help your daughter. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she turned and walked out of the courtroom, her footsteps echoing like a funeral march. Harold waited until the room cleared before allowing himself a small smile. Another case closed, another check deposited, another day in the life of Gotham's most flexible judge. He gathered his files and prepared to return to chambers, already thinking about his lunch appointment with Vincent Torino. His phone buzzed as he reached his office. A text from an unknown number. Justice may be blind, but judgment sees everything. Harold frowned and deleted the message. Probably some crank who'd been following the case. Gotham was full of bleeding hearts who thought the system owed them something. They'd learn, eventually, that the system only owed you what you could afford to buy. He opened his safe and pulled out a leather-bound ledger that matched the one Vincent kept. 3 generations of Morrisons had sat on Gotham's benches, and 3 generations had understood that justice was a business like any other. Supply and demand, profit and loss, winners and losers. Harold opened the ledger to today's date and wrote, Martinez v. Apex. Dismissed. Payment received. Case closed. But as he locked the ledger away, something nagged at him. The text message had felt different somehow, not desperate or angry like the usual crank mail, but cold and certain. Like a diagnosis from a doctor who'd already seen your x-rays. Harold shook off the feeling and straightened his tie. He had 3 more cases this afternoon. All of which would require his special attention. A rape case where the victim was poor and the defendant was rich. A drug trafficking charge where the suspect had friends in City Hall. A child abuse case where the social worker had asked too many questions. It was going to be another profitable day in paradise. Outside his window, Gotham stretched out like a cancer under the gray sky. Somewhere in that maze of suffering and corruption, Sarah Martinez was walking home to tell her dying daughter that justice was a luxury they couldn't afford. But somewhere else in that same maze, something was watching and waiting and remembering every unpunished crime, every denied appeal, every time the scales of justice had been rigged by men like Harold Morrison. Something that understood the difference between law and justice. And had already chosen which side it served. Chapter 4, Interest Compounding. Vincent Torino received the news of Judge Morrison's ruling while he was having lunch at his favorite restaurant, the same one where he'd broken Marcus Chan's fingers 12 hours earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him as he cut into his veal, the meat tender and pink under his knife. Beautiful work, Your Honor, he said into his phone, watching the blood pool on his plate. Clean, efficient, and permanent. Everything I appreciate in a business partner. Judge Morrison's voice carried the satisfaction of a job well done. The case is dismissed with prejudice, Vincent. She can't refile, can't appeal. It's buried deeper than Jimmy Hoffa. And the court costs $1,800. Due immediately, or we can start garnishing what's left of her assets. Vincent smiled and took another bite of veal. The meat practically dissolved on his tongue, seasoned with the tears of his enemies. Added to her tab. I'll be collecting everything she owes tonight. After hanging up, Vincent opened his tablet and reviewed the Martinez file. Sarah Martinez now owed him $15,000 in principal, plus interest, plus court costs, plus the penalty fees he'd be adding for her attempt to circumvent their agreement through legal channels. The total came to $19,847. It was a beautiful number, large enough to be impossible, specific enough to sound official, and devastating enough to destroy what was left of her pathetic life. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text from Tony Ricci, package delivered. Clean entry. No witnesses. Perfect. While Sarah had been in court watching her last hope die, Tony had been busy at her apartment, installing the surveillance equipment and preparing the collection site. Vincent believed in being thorough. When you owned someone's life, you needed to document every moment of their destruction. He finished his lunch and drove to the Martinez apartment building, a festering sore on Gotham's Lower East Side. The building's superintendent, a tweaker named Eddie who owed Vincent $3,000 in gambling debts, had provided the keys and the security codes. Everyone in this neighborhood was either a customer, a debtor, or future merchandise. Vincent climbed to the 3rd floor, his Italian leather shoes silent on the stained carpet. The hallway smelled like piss and broken dreams, but Vincent had grown up in places like this. He understood that poverty was a business opportunity, and desperation was the most renewable resource in Gotham. He knocked on apartment 3B with the gentle tap of a concerned neighbor. Mrs. Martinez. It's Vincent. I heard about the court case. I thought you might want to discuss our arrangement. The silence stretched for 30 seconds before the door opened a crack, still secured by the chain lock. Sarah's eye appeared in the gap, red-rimmed and hollow with exhaustion. I told you, I need more time. The case is over, Vincent finished. Dismissed with prejudice. No appeal possible. And now you owe court costs on top of everything else. He held up his tablet, showing her the updated balance. $19,847. Plus today's interest, of course. Sarah's face went white. That's impossible. You said 15,000. I said a lot of things. What I'm saying now is that your debt has compounded. Legal fees, penalties for attempting to breach our contract, and emotional distress for the trouble you've caused me. Vincent's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. But I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer you a payment plan. What kind of payment plan? Vincent gestured to the chain lock. Why don't you invite me in? This conversation requires privacy. Sarah hesitated, her maternal instinct soaring with her desperation. Finally, she released the chain and stepped back. Vincent entered the apartment, Noting the placement of Tony's hidden cameras, the reinforced door locks, and the strategic positioning of his men in the building's stairwells. The apartment was a shrine to poverty: thrift store furniture, generic groceries, and the pervading smell of fear. Sofia Martinez sat at the kitchen table, working on homework while N4 drip-fed medication into her thin arm. She looked up as Vincent entered, her dark eyes curious but unafraid. "Mama, who's the man in the fancy suit?" "A friend of Mama's, sweetheart. Keep working on your math." Vincent studied the child with the clinical interest of a livestock appraiser. 8 years old, underdeveloped due to malnutrition, but she had potential. The medical condition was actually a selling point for certain clients. They enjoyed the power dynamic of complete dependency. "Beautiful daughter," Vincent said, his voice carrying undertones that made Sarah's skin crawl. "She has your eyes." "Don't." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Please don't." Vincent sat down on the couch without invitation, crossing his legs and making himself comfortable. "Mrs. Martinez, let's discuss your options. Option 1, you pay me $19,847 by midnight. Tonight. I don't have that kind of money. You know I don't. Option 2, you begin working for me to pay off your debt. I have several business ventures that require female participation. The work is demanding, but the pay is regular." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "I won't." Option 3, Vincent continued as if she hadn't spoken, "Sofia joins my youth development program. I have clients who are very interested in sponsoring promising young girls. They provide housing, education, and all necessary medical care." The medication drip made a soft clicking sound as it fed life into Sofia's veins. The child continued working on her fractions, unaware that her future was being bartered in the next room. "You're talking about selling my daughter," Sarah said, her voice hollow with horror. "I'm talking about providing opportunities," Vincent corrected. Sofia would have access to private medical care, tutoring, and social connections that could benefit her for life. "Some of my youngest alumni have gone on to very successful careers." He pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a photo: a teenage girl in an expensive dress, smiling at a camera while an older man's hands rested possessively on her shoulders. "This is Amanda. She started working for me when she was 10. Now she's 17 and engaged to a very prominent businessman. Her medical bills? Taken care of. Her education? Private school and college prep. Her future? Secured." Sarah stared at the photo, seeing past the expensive dress and makeup to the emptiness in the girl's eyes. "How many others?" "Enough to know what works." Vincent pocketed the phone and checked his watch. "I'm a businessman, Mrs. Martinez. I don't make money from damaged goods. My girls are well cared for, well educated, and well protected. They live better than they ever would have in places like this." He gestured around the apartment with obvious distaste. "Look at your daughter's future here. Malnutrition, substandard education, progressive medical deterioration. She'll be dead before she's 16, or worse, she'll survive and end up like you. What's that supposed to mean?" Vincent's smile was a blade wrapped in silk. "Desperate. Broken. Begging men like me for mercy that doesn't exist." Sofia looked up from her homework, sensing the tension in the room. "Mama. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby. Keep working." Vincent stood and walked to the kitchen table, looming over the child like a well-dressed predator. "What are you studying, sweetheart?" "Fractions," Sofia replied, her voice small but not afraid. "I'm trying to figure out 3/4 of 24. 18, Vincent said immediately. 3/4 of 24 is 18. You take the whole number and multiply it by the numerator, then divide by the denominator." Sofia's face lit up with understanding. "Oh. So if I want half of 16, I multiply 16 by 1 and divide by 2. "Exactly. You're a very smart girl, Sofia. Smart girls do well in my programs." Sarah moved quickly, putting herself between Vincent and her daughter. "Get away from her." "I'm just helping with homework," Vincent said innocently. "Education is important. It opens doors that might otherwise remain closed." He returned to the couch and checked his watch again. "It's now 2:30 p.m. You have 9.5 hours to make your decision. Option 1, Option 2, or Option 3. But Mrs. Martinez." His voice hardened to steel. "You will choose one of them. The alternative is unpleasant." "What alternative?" Vincent's smile vanished, replaced by something that belonged in nightmares. "I burn this building down with both of you inside. Then I collect on your life insurance and call it a day." The apartment fell silent except for the click of Sofia's foredrip and the distant sound of sirens in the Gotham afternoon. Vincent let the silence stretch, watching Sarah's face cycle through horror, despair, and finally, acceptance. "I need time to think." You have 9.5 hours. Not a minute more. Vincent stood and straightened his tie. I'll return at midnight for your answer. I suggest you use the time wisely. He walked to the door, then paused. Oh, and Mrs. Martinez. Don't even think about running. I have people watching this building, your daughter's school, and every hospital in the city. You're in my ecosystem now, and in ecosystems, the strong survive by consuming the weak. Vincent left the apartment and walked down the hallway, humming the same Italian song his grandfather used to sing. Behind him, he could hear Sarah Martinez crying not the angry tears of defiance, but the broken sobs of complete defeat. His phone buzzed with a message from Tony, building secured. All exits covered. Martinez package ready for midnight collection. Vincent replied, excellent. Prepare both scenarios. I want options. As he descended the stairs, Vincent thought about fractions. 3/4 of 24 was indeed 18. 3/4 of a life was about 57 years. 3/4 of a childhood was about 13 years. Sophia Martinez was 8 years old. That meant she had approximately 5 years of childhood left to enjoy, assuming she lived that long. Vincent planned to make the most of those remaining fractions. He stepped out into the Gotham afternoon, where the sun was trying to burn through the smog and failing. The city sprawled around him like a feast laid out for predators, full of broken families and desperate parents and children who would soon learn that innocence was just another commodity to be bought and sold. Vincent adjusted his gold watch and smiled. In 9.5 hours, he would collect his payment in full, one way or another. The scales of justice might be broken, but the scales of commerce were working perfectly. Business was good. Chapter 5, The Black Envelope. Sarah Martinez sat on her daughter's bed, watching Sophia sleep fitfully under the thin blanket. The foredrip continued its mechanical rhythm, feeding precious medication into her daughter's failing body. Each drop cost 57 cents. Sarah had done the math obsessively, calculating how many drops they could afford, how many days of life she could buy with the money she didn't have. The apartment was silent except for Sophia's labored breathing and the distant sounds of Gotham's night symphony. Sarah had triple-checked the locks after Vincent left, but she knew they were meaningless. He owned this building, this neighborhood, probably half the cops who would respond if she called for help. 3 options, she thought, her mind cycling through Vincent's ultimatum like a broken record. Sell herself. Sell Sophia. Or die. The clock on Sophia's nightstand read 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until Vincent returned for her answer. 13 minutes to choose which nightmare would consume what was left of their lives. Sarah stood and walked to the kitchen window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. 3 stories below, she could see Tony Ricci's car parked across the street, its occupant smoking a cigarette while he waited. 2 more of Vincent's men lounged in the building's lobby, and another one patrolled the alley behind the building. A perfect box with no way out. She thought about David, about the night shift that was supposed to be routine. About the way he'd kissed her goodbye and promised to fix the leaky faucet when he got home. About the call from the hospital at 3:17 a.m. This file is longer than 30 minutes. Go unlimited at turboscribe.ai to transcribe files up to 10 hours long.